Who the hell can wait till morning? Talk now at latenightsportsradio.com.
I'll start off, Jim. I'm sorry for last week. This is the FantasyGreek.com's NFL starts and sits in 60 minutes, Week 4 edition. After coming off an absolutely topsy-turvy week where up was down, left was right, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Oh gosh, it was awful, just awful. Jim, how are you tonight?
You know, Keith, considering it's hump day, it is this time of my night or my day. I mean, this is 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern for you. I am now at the hump of hump day, and it's about to go downhill.
Oh, absolutely, especially when I bring up the fact that out of all the games that we picked last week, while you can take a feather in your cap that you beat me by one pick, but you only picked 7, correct? And I picked 6.
That's not fun.
No, not at all. It's like, better than bad doesn't mean good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, we both whiffed on the Texans-Patriots game, but honestly, who thought that? You know what I mean? It's tip your cap to Bill Belichick doing what he did with a rookie quarterback in Jacoby Brissett. The Cardinals putting up an absolute dud against the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo. The Carolina Panthers just getting spanked by the Minnesota Vikings defense primarily, but oh my gosh. The Giants losing that game to the Redskins at home.
Yeah.
The Jets putting up, you want to talk about somebody that didn't show up? The Jets at the Chiefs.
Oh, that game was brutal.
Yeah, I mean, between Fitzpatrick and Carson Palmer, I think they were trying to set a competition for the most bad throws in a single game. I'm not sure who won, by the way. And then Monday night, the Saints losing a home division game to the Falcons on Monday night in prime time. It's just one of those weeks that there's just an aberration. I mean, I wanted to drink heavily by the end of Sunday.
Did you?
Yeah, I wanted to because my fantasy team and I tweeted out my lineup: Carson Palmer, C.J. Anderson, D'Angelo Williams, Odell Beckham Jr. Who else were my studs? Nobody hit. Not a single one of them hit for anything.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, and I got my tuchus handed to me by a guy that's been in the toilet bowl the last 2 seasons in our league. So it's just, I'm the 2-time defending champ. He's been in the lottery the last 2 seasons, so it's been like a never-ending stream of ribbing since the final score was announced. But anyway. Onward and upward, looking forward to the future. The way this works, kids, is Jim and I will go matchup by matchup through the Week 4 schedule, telling you who you should and shouldn't start in your fantasy league, and we'll also give our picks with no point spread involved for the upcoming games. If at any time you want to challenge us with your individual lineup questions and issues, the phone number here is 585-633-7487. That's 585-633-7487. Or hit us up on Twitter with the hashtag AskTFG, AskTFG, and we will get to your request in a timely manner. So, without further ado, we're going to the Thursday night game, which is the Miami Dolphins at the Cincinnati Bengals. The Dolphins and the Bengals are 2 teams that I'm really struggling to get a read on because they're both 1-2. They seem to show up pretty decent one week, and then you don't really know what to expect the next week. So far this season, the Dolphins 1 win in opening week against the Falcons, 17-6, but then losing games to the Titans, 21-10, and then I'm sorry, I'm looking at the schedule the wrong way. I apologize, dear Lord. No, because look, I'm looking at an ESPN site, and they got the last 5 games listed, and they're including the freaking preseason games. That's just silly. It makes no sense to me. Dear God. Anyway, the Dolphins 1-2 beating the Cleveland Browns in overtime, 30-24. and then losing to the Patriots and the Seahawks. The Bengals beating the Jets by 1 in Week 1, and then losing to the Steelers 24-16 in a big divisional matchup, and then losing to 29-17 in a game where Trevor Siemian looked like he might just be a decent passer. I mean, the knock on Siemian has been that it's been the yards after the catch and the game plan and everything, but Siemian seemed to throw some decent balls from what I saw anyway in that game. Looking at how these teams match up, the Dolphins score 21 a game and change. The Bengals not so potent on offense at only 18, and they're also giving up 25 a game to the Dolphins 22. I think this is a turnaround game for the Bengals because I'm just not sold on the Dolphins. I'm going to take the home team on Thursday night. I'm taking Cincinnati.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Bengals too. I mean, they kind of need a bounce. They need something good to go their way. They're a 1-2 team. I think many of us thought they'd either be worst case 2-1, best case 3-0, and it just hasn't happened. And the Dolphins, you pointed out they should have blown out the Browns last week, and they didn't. And that sort of leaves, especially. I mean, think how well their defense played Week 1 against Seattle. I mean, they looked like they were a different team, and yet now suddenly they've dwarfed into sort of, I hate saying this, what we expected. So I'm going to take the Bengals too. I think it'll be a sort of a one-sided win. They'll probably win by a touchdown. From a fantasy perspective, this is a good game for A.J. Green. I don't think the Dolphins' pass defense has been that great. This is a game that sets up right for him, anywhere from 70 to 120 yards, 1 TD, so you want to get him started. Love Jeremy Hill this week. The Dolphins have struggled against the rush defense. He's one of our stardoms this week. You can read more about that at thefantasygreek.com in our stardom article, which is on the homepage. And Jarvis Landry, he's pretty much a natural must-start every single week. Last week he had 7 receptions, 120 yards, and a touchdown. He is just, at a minimum, he gets himself 7 catches, and really the rest of it is how productive can he be. You just go ahead and start him, even against the Bengals, whose defense has played well, but I think Jarvis Landry can beat him. From the rest of the team's perspective, the Bengals make for, I think, a low-end start. Devontae Parker, I like him, even though he's more of a wide receiver 3 or a flex play in deeper leagues. Tyler Kroft is flying under the radar. He's certainly, I have him sort of as a top 10, top 12 TE1 this week because of the matchup. The Dolphins have struggled defending the position. Everybody else is kind of like, you don't have to play him. You can avoid him. Brandon LaFell, he's only good in a 14 or 16 team league as a flex. Avoid the running backs for the Dolphins. What a mess. I did an article that's on the site. You can find it under the analytics tab, which basically covers all the committee situations last week, just for the teams that had to start a running back who was a backup the week before, and they started because of the injuries. And you'll see what a mess the Dolphins' backfield situation is. It's just a guessing game. After that, Keith, I think this is not going to be a big fantasy game for people, but you get a couple of these guys in and you move on to the weekend. Bengals win.
All right, the Indianapolis Colts and Jacksonville Jaguars from London, Sunday morning, 9:30 a.m. Make sure you set your alarm, kids. The Jags 0-3, the Colts 1-2. Both teams can throw the ball pretty well. Neither team really runs the ball great, but Jacksonville is far worse, averaging only 55 yards per game on the ground, which is, I don't care how good Blake Bortles can be, you're not going to win with that recipe. On defense, the Jaguars are giving up 28 a game. The Colts over 31 points a game. That's just not going to get it done, even though they did manage to beat a fairly talented San Diego, although banged up, fairly talented San Diego Chargers team last week, 26-22. This game is probably going to be a high-scoring game because neither defense seems to be interested in stopping anybody from scoring in any way meaningful. Anyway, it's a home game for Jacksonville, but it's not a home game. They're in London. Anything can go, but that Luck guy is still pretty good. I've heard a lot of Twitter hubbub calling him overrated and whatnot, and I just think that is just crazy. I'm going with the better quarterback in this situation because the defenses and the running game are garbage. I'm going to pick the Colts.
And I'm going to take the Colts too. This is expected to be the second highest scoring game of the week. But I'm a little cautious about it because, number one, it's like you said, it's in London, so there's no real home field advantage. Or, I mean, I suppose you could sit there and say the Jaguars have that advantage because their ownership has ownership interests in England with the soccer team over there. But, this is anything can happen, and I think what we've seen is players tend to show up and play some football. The Jaguars' defense sort of flashed a little bit. Indianapolis, they've struggled a little bit. So, you kind of – but let's just stick with the idea both teams are going to want to throw the football this week. And because of that, Andrew Luck makes a top 5 start. Obviously, you start T.Y. Hilton as usual. Philip Dorsett is a wide receiver 3 or flex play because Dante Moncrief's out for a few weeks. Dwayne Allen is in the mix. Over on the side of the Jaguars, you can start Blake Bortles. I know he hasn't been that great. His fantasy points are coming a lot in garbage time, and you know what? To be honest, who cares? As long as he's getting the points, that's great. Julius Thomas is a low TE1 option this week. Allen Robinson, I think you got to keep starting him regardless of his struggles. Sooner or later he's got to shake them off. And I think if you're one of the players, I'm going to study this a little bit more when I sit down to work on my USA Today article on deep sleepers. TJ Yeldon makes for an interesting play this week because the Colts have given up 213 yards passing and 2 TDs to running backs. And Yeldon is going to be the receiver out of the backfield, I think, more than Ivory will be. So that's why I just can't tell you with confidence. Check out the article. If I don't include him, obviously I lost some of my confidence in it, but it's an interesting play. So, Keith, I'll take the Colts, but I'm a little guarded in this because I think this game could go the other direction. It could go from a high-scoring game to a medium, low-scoring game.
All right, the Carolina Panthers travel to the Atlanta Falcons in an NFC South matchup. The Carolina Panthers getting just pummeled last week by the Minnesota Vikings. The Falcons winning a Monday night game on the road in New Orleans, 45-32. The thing about the Falcons, you look at, they're putting up 34 and change a game, great, but they're giving up 30. I don't see Carolina replicating that performance from last week. Atlanta's defense is not Minnesota. But Minnesota did a fantastic job and maybe laid the blueprint of how to stymie Cam Newton, who basically just beat him to a pulp. I also don't like the fact that the Falcons are giving up $120 on the ground. The Carolina Panthers love to run the ball, regardless of who's back there. Jonathan Stewart's banged up, but whether it's Fozzie Whitaker or Cam himself or somebody else, they're going to get their yards on the ground. I'm taking the Panthers on the road.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Panthers, too. The one thing that you can almost certainly count on in this game is a lack of defense from the Falcons. Cam Newton is the number 1 start this week against the Falcons team, giving up the most fantasy points to the position. So start him with confidence. Go ahead and start Kelvin Benjamin with confidence. Greg Olsen with confidence, who I think also has the number 1 matchup for tight ends. And go ahead and start the Panthers defense. I don't know that you'll get what we typically get from them because this Falcons offense, I got to tip my hat to Matt Ryan. He's having a much better season than I think anybody expected. If he puts up what he put up last week, 240, 50 yards, 2 TDs this week, that's going to be a good play for him. Julio Jones, this is not a good matchup, but how do you sit the guy, especially in PPR? There's no way. You've got to start him. Jacob Tamme has come on, so he's playable as a low TE1, and then you got to start Devonta Freeman and Tevin Coleman because they can blow it up at any time. And, I wish I could be more definitive because the matchup doesn't bode well, but I don't know how you set any of these guys based on how they've played so far. But I'm going to take the Panthers.
The Oakland Raiders travel to the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens sitting at 3-0. The Raiders 2-1, but also 2-0 on the road. Very important here. West Coast teams traveling east don't usually fare well. And I usually hate picking against them. But looking at the numbers here, let's break this down here. The Raiders can score a little bit better than the Ravens, but they also, again, in turn, give up 26 and change a game. The Ravens' defense has been downright stingy, 14.7 per game allowed there, but they've also played the likes of the Buffalo Bills, the Cleveland Browns, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Not exactly offensive juggernauts. Yards offensively, very similar passing games. However, the Raiders can run the ball a lot better than the Ravens. 148.3 averaged on the ground for the Raiders. But the Ravens' rushing defense, though, only giving up 86 and change a game. The Raiders give up 344 through the air on average. Something has got to give here. And that West Coast thing I just mentioned, it's going to play a part in my pick here, kids. I don't like the Raiders being able to beat the Ravens in this matchup in Baltimore. If it was Oakland, it might be a little bit more of a toss-up. I'm picking the Ravens.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think this is a tough trip for the Raiders to make out to the East Coast. The Ravens defense should be able to do enough to hold the Ravens. Yeah, the Ravens defense should do enough to be able to hold the Raiders offense at bay. It's going to be a tough game for him. Derek Carr, I still have him as a QB1, but he's a little bit down in my ranks. Latavius Murray is a decent play, but he's a little shakier this week. I've seen some people really put him up high, and I'm not sure why, because the Ravens have been pretty stingy against running backs. And with him splitting the touches, that gets me a little nervous. So I like him more as a mid to low end RB2. Amari Cooper, you keep starting him. You keep starting Michael Crabtree. Maybe knock him down to wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3s, respectively. For the Ravens, this should be Joe Flacco's. I mean, he's supposed to break out here. He's supposed to have a good game. He's startable as a low end QB1 this week. And this is a Raiders defense that up until last week struggled tremendously against the pass. And of concern is obviously the Raiders did play much better last week, but they did play the Titans, and the Titans have been struggling. So it's hard for me to sit there and tell you that they're going to do the same. If their defense has a good game this week, I think we've got to consider them as a unit to talk about in fantasy football going forward. But if the Ravens just walk all over them, we'll hold off on that conversation for a while. Anyway, I got Joe Flacco as a start. Mike Wallace, you keep starting him. A guy that I think you've got to put in for a flex play, if not in 12-team leagues, certainly in 14 and 16-team leagues, is Steve Smith. Every week he's getting I can't say that he's getting more snaps, but he's getting more receptions and more yards. I mean, it looks like he's starting to flourish in that offense again. Dennis Pitta is doing well. You can keep starting him. And I would start the Ravens defense because they're playing like a top 10 unit right now. Ravens win.
The Detroit Lions travel to Chicago to play the Bears in an NFC North matchup. The Lions sitting at 1-2. The Bears still winless after Monday night's thumping at the hands of the Dallas Cowboys with the first game of the Brian Hoyer era. Oof. Yeah, anyway. Story by the numbers for this game, the Bears offense, paltry at best, 15 points a game. But don't worry, kids, they're giving up almost 4 touchdowns a game. The Lions can score better, but their defense is just as shoddy. The Bears have not been able to manage anything on the ground. However, I'll let Jim talk about it. That may be changing this week. The Lions, on the other hand, breaking the century mark on the ground on average so far this year. The Bears' rushing defense allowing 142.7 yards per game on the ground. That is god-awful. Has to be fixed. Not going to change this week due to a tremendous amount of injuries still on that defense. This is what is shaping up very quickly to be a lost season for Chicago. The Lions last week got down in a giant hole in Green Bay and almost fought their way all the way back, 34-27. I don't like the way that Detroit's offense matches up with Chicago's defense, regardless of what offensive additions the Bears make, or what Hoyer may or may not bring to this team in Jay Cutler's stead. I'm taking the Lions to go into Chicago and just make everybody miserable more.
Yeah, I think they've got this game. Is a below average game. Well, a lot of it reeks of it being a high scoring game. I mean, the defense has problems for the Bears. The Lions certainly didn't stand up well to Aaron Rodgers. In terms of streaming options this week, Brian Hoyer and Zach Miller are the top streaming options in their respective positions because of how terribly the Lions have defended those positions through 3 weeks of football. That makes Alshon Jeffrey still a play, regardless of what happened last week. Kevin White suddenly becomes a flex play in deeper leagues of 14, 16 teams. And now you've got Jordan Howard, this new young kid who, I think if he gets his wheels going, man, he could have a huge game here. On the flip side, we got Matt Stafford, who's absolutely been fantasy gold. We hyped him up in the preseason, and he's followed through. Their passing game is thriving. Marvin Jones is just incredible. I mean, how do you can never sit this guy. He's a top 12, top 10 option every single week, even though a lot of people aren't ranking him that way. We are ranking him that way because you got to play him. Golden Tate is unfortunately a bust, and I don't know what there is to do. I think you got to bench him until he cleans things up. Anquan Bolden's almost a better play, even though I wouldn't necessarily go with him. Theo Riddick, good PPR guy. This kid's Wayne Washington that they're rolling out this week. I absolutely love him. Keith, you said the numbers right there of what the Bears are giving up in terms of their running game. It's absolutely awful. He's going to be the rushing running back for the Lions. He should have a huge game this week. So if you picked him up on waivers, go ahead and start him as your RB2, or if you need a flex play, go ahead and start him with confidence. I'm going to take the Lions on the road as well. Now that we're talking, I think this is going to be an ugly, high-scoring game.
Oh, it's going to be god awful. Tip back the beers, Chicagoans.
And it's kind of sad because the Bears do tip it. Previously, historically, they played the Lions tough in Soldier Field.
Yep. Nope. This season is just god. The worst part about being a Bears fan with this team is that there just doesn't seem to be any relief on the horizon.
Yep.
And it's I don't want to. I hate to be the knee-jerk, premature overreactor, but it's almost time to start questioning Ryan Pace because almost none of his moves have panned out. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Well, on paper, it's. I think he's done the right things. It's like you said, it hasn't panned out. Whether or not you want to actually say it's his fault or the player's fault or the coach's fault, that's a different story.
Ultimately judged by your results, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, the Tennessee Titans travel to the Houston Texans. The Titans sitting at 1-2 after losing to the Raiders 17-10 at home. The Texans reeling after the 27-0 whitewashing that Jacoby Brissett and the New England Patriots laid on them. I don't see the Texans putting together that kind of dog of an offensive performance against the Titans defense. These teams are really, really even statistically. They both score 14 a game. The Titans allow 19. The Texans allow 17.7. The Titans pass for 241. The Texans throw for 231. The Titans rush for $128. The Texans rush for $111 a game in yards allowed. The Texans are much better against the pass. However, the Texans give up $125 a game on the ground, and the Titans aren't exactly rush defense stalwarts or anything, but they do like to run the ball more than they like to throw. And if they can run the ball on Houston, this might be a wrinkle for them to eke out an upset, but I just don't see that happening. Division game, I'm taking the home team. I'm taking the Texans.
This is likely the lowest scoring game of the week, which makes it disconcerting for some of the fantasy players on both teams. The Tennessee Titans, whatever you want to say, boy, last week they held in check a very good Oakland Raiders offense. And it seems every single week we're seeing them take another step. It's their offense that sort of hasn't caught up yet. Certainly we'll get to see how devastating the J.J. Watt injury is to the Texans defense this week, but the full scope of it may take another game or two to really sort of let itself pan out. For the Titans, my favorite player here is going to be DeMarco Murray. He's just been having a solid season. And I don't care whether it's running the football or catching the football as a receiver out of the backfield, what have you. He's going to be the strongest play on this team. Like Tajae Sharp, if he's still on your roster, I've seen a lot of people start dumping him after he's sort of struggled in these choice matchups that he's had. He's definitely a must-sit. Don't even consider playing him this week. For the Texans, Lamar Miller, you're going to start him, but this is a tough matchup. The Titans are in the top 5 to 10 teams in terms of fantasy points allowed, so it might have a tough time going. You're obviously going to roll out with DeAndre Hopkins. He's their best guy. Will Fuller, I think he's another guy you just keep playing him and keep your fingers crossed. Brock Osweiler gets it together because they really need these two guys to start clicking. They need that offense to click. So we'll see. I've mentioned a few names because in a low-scoring game, there's only a few guys to consider. Texans win.
The Buffalo Bills travel to the New England Patriots. The Bills sitting at 1-2. The Patriots undefeated, 3-0. The Bills winning against the Arizona Cardinals at home, 33-18 last week in a game no one saw coming. And like I said before, with the Texans the Patriots whitewashed them 27-0. We still don't know who's going to play quarterback for the Patriots. Both Jacoby Brissett and Jimmy Garoppolo were both limited in practice, according to ESPN. And looking how these teams match up, it's really not. If you're going to look at that Arizona game and say that's really what the Buffalo Bills are, I'm not ready to make that leap yet. And looking at what New England did to a pretty good Houston Texans team with a rookie quarterback on Thursday night, I'm not betting against the Patriots, especially at home. Pats win.
Yeah, I don't know how you could possibly go against the Pats. If what was proven last week, without question, was that this is a Patriots team that is built on a system, and especially at quarterback, pretty much anybody you put there should thrive in this system, and that was shown last week. And they'll adjust it to the player's strengths. So, I'm not worried that it's the Bills' defense, and God bless the Bills. I think they have a good defensive unit, even though, they don't show it every single week. LeGarrette Blount is a must-start. I mean, this guy, they're just going to let him run and pound to no end. Rob Gronkowski, you're going to get him active even if he ends up just being used as a red zone target. Go ahead and start him up. I think you got to roll with Julian Edelman as a wide receiver 3. At that point, Martellus Bennett, I have him as a low TE1, and that assumes that Gronkowski does not play. I think if Gronkowski plays, you might want to avoid him if hopefully you have another backup. Maybe a Kyle Rudolph would be a good play this week. For the Bills, Tyrod Taylor, I would avoid him. They're gonna game plan for him and shut him down. Sammy Watkins, it sounds like he may miss again. He's hard to bench if he's active, but hopefully you've survived these few weeks. I know one of my teams is not surviving very well because of all the injuries on the team. Sammy Watkins among them, and LaShawn McCoy, I would start him. He's just he's either going to get you 50 yards and maybe 25 receiving, or he's going to blow it out for 120 and 1 or 2 TDs. I think you got to keep rolling with them as long as possible. But Keith, how did the Bills go into Gillette Stadium and when I just don't see it? Patriots win.
The Seattle Seahawks travel to the New York Jets. The Seahawks sitting 2-1. The Jets 1-2 after losing pathetically to the Kansas City Chiefs 24-3. Ryan Fitzpatrick throwing 206 interceptions in that game. Seattle Seahawks winning against the San Francisco 49ers 37-18, but that should not be a feather in anyone's cap, especially the Seahawks. There's some talk about Russell Wilson being banged up, but he was not listed on the official injury report. Thomas Rawls is, however, listed as out, which is interesting. You're looking at how these teams match up by the numbers. The Jets are giving up 26 points per game. The Seahawks just 12.3. They are the better defensive team by any stretch of the imagination. But that Seahawks offense, they're averaging 17 points per game, but that 37-point performance last week is really inflating that. The previous 2 weeks against the Rams and the Dolphins, they scored 9 and 12 points respectively. Especially if Wilson's banged up, he may not be able to, or may not have to miss any time. But especially if he's banged up, the Jets' defense, while they haven't really played well statistically, there is still talent on that squad. And when they're giving up 300 yards and change through the air, it's just not going to get it done. It's just not. This is that West Coast team traveling to the East again. This is a game that Seattle, on paper, if you look at roster by roster, should win just based on their defense alone. And I'm willing to ride that out and override my previous gut instinct. I'm going to pick the Seahawks here because I just don't have any faith in the Jets right now.
Yeah, Keith, my number one sit of the week is in this game, and it's Ryan Fitzpatrick for the Jets. I mean, put to the side the disaster that happened last week when he was trying to get his team back into the game, and he's just slinging the football around. And he ends up throwing 6 interceptions. Just forget that. Don't even think about it. It's not important. No big deal. But what is a big deal is the fact that the Seahawks have yet to allow a passing TD. I want to say that they've only given up 250 yards. I mean, some ridiculously low number. And you look at Ryan Fitzpatrick and go, you shouldn't don't do this. And another reason, let's throw in here, Eric Decker may not play. So I'm just having lots of problems looking around and thinking who you're going to play. I mean, Matt Forte, I think you have to keep rolling with him. But this isn't like, he necessarily has ruled over the Seahawks during his career. So there's certainly some risk. Brandon Marshall, risk. If your buddy Quincy Enunwa gets the start, I like him. He's certainly a better option, but only as a flex play, and I'd recommend more in 14, 16-team leagues. For the Seahawks, start their defense. Jimmy Graham, oh my God, he came out of nowhere last week and put up, what was it, I think 6 or 8 receptions, 100 yards, 1 TD. Just crazy. This is the way we've envisioned him being used, and finally it happened. Will it happen this week? I don't know. I mean, it's just sort of the magical question whether or not they'll actually make him a full-time part of their offense. That remains to be seen, but you can certainly view him as a TE1 in your roster selections. Christine Michael, this is a tough matchup for him. I've downgraded him to an RB2. Doug Baldwin, I think he's a wide receiver 3. Tyler Lockett, a flex play. Russell Wilson, I expect him to play. And if he plays, I think he's a gamer against that Jets defense because he's more sort of like Tyrod Taylor, not exactly like him, but sort of more like him than he is a Tom Brady, for example. And if he can move around on that foot, he can have himself a good game. I think you've got to sort of gauge it with who's your next option. If it was Andrew Luck, I'd start Andrew Luck. But if it's Brock Osweiler, I would stick with Russell Wilson. Seahawks on the road, Keith.
Cleveland Browns travel to the Washington Redskins. The Browns at 0-3, and the Redskins at 1-2. And you're all going to think I'm crazy, but I'm telling you this, and I'm expecting the eye rolls. I think the Browns have turned a corner. Not that they're going to win or make the playoffs, but I like the way that they're gelling through all of the injuries, all of the chaos, all of the rebuild. They seem to be at least coherent. What's the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm looking for? The cohesion is there from when you watch this team play. The Redskins are a mess, an absolute mess, and these two teams are much more even than anybody wants to admit. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to pick the Browns to go into Washington and get their first win of the season right here. I'm picking Cleveland.
So, Keith, I was sitting there, doing my picks, and I had that urge. I was fired up. I'm like, Believe Land, baby. Yeah, Browns, yeah. Oh, there's some guys I want to play this week. Yeah, they're going to win this game. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. They don't have a defense. And I just thought to myself, for all the problems that the Redskins have, they still have Kirk Cousins. They still have Deshaun Jackson. Jamison Crowder is an incredible football player. Well, I'm not a big fan of Matt Jones. The matchup is right, and he should be able to get some work, some yards, do something. He's certainly a high-end RB3 for those of you that have him and are trying to think of what to do with him. Deshaun Jackson is definitely startable. Jamison Crowder, he's a flex or an injury replacement. Like in one league, I have Sammy Watkins, and if he doesn't go, I'm putting Jamison Crowder in. And in fact, I might put him in anyway because he's getting a bunch of receptions each and every week. And he's actually moved up above Pierre Garçon. And then, of course, you start Jordan Reed and Kirk Cousins can be a top QB1 start. Not a top, but top 10 because this is such a favorable matchup. Swing it over to the Browns, and the number one running back play is Isaiah Crowell. This Redskins team is awful. They've given up like near 350 yards rushing. How many TDs is it? Like 6? I mean, it's a ridiculous number. Here we go. 365 yards rushing, 6 TDs to running backs. Do you believe that, Keith?
No,
6 TDs.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. So Isaiah Crowell in 2 out of 3 games, and credit Hugh Jackson when he said we're going to run him. Boy, they're running him. 2 out of 3 games, he put up very, very good fantasy numbers. Expect that again, so start him in every single format. I love Terrell Pryor. He's going to be the go-to guy, and what's neat about him is they're just going to take shots, and they're going to go let him go get the football. The Redskins secondary is all banged up. They lost D'Angelo Hall. I would have no problem starting him, no problem starting Gary Barnidge is sort of a low-end TE1. There's a few guys that start ahead of him for sure, but if you're rolling with him, I mean, why not one more week? And then sort of a sleeper, and somebody I'm going to write about a little bit later in this week, I think, is Duke Johnson, because all these yards, all this stuff that they're giving up to running backs, Isaiah Crowell can't possibly manage it all. And I don't see Hugh Jackson wanting him to have 30 touches. I think he's going to siphon off a bunch of those touches to Duke Johnson, which in my mind makes him a deep sleeper this week. And somebody, if you're one of those people struggling to fill that second running back position, I mean, I don't see why not giving him a go. But I'm taking Washington at home.
All right, the Denver Broncos travel to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Broncos sitting at 3-0. The Buccaneers 1-2. You know, the Buccaneers, they go on the road, they beat Atlanta. Like, wow, that's a nice way to start the season. I almost went into a de facto Chris Berman impersonation there. I just caught myself. Wow, that's a nice start to the season there. But then they go to Arizona, they lose 40-7. You're like, the Cardinals are a pretty good team. And then they go home and then they host the Rams, and then they lose to the Rams 37-32. And then you're being like, okay, everybody, let's just stop with the Jameis train right now. Just hold on a second. And I'm not saying it's got anything to do with him, but that Rams game that was a very winnable game for that team, in my opinion. The Broncos, on the other hand, have beaten the Carolina Panthers. They've beaten Andrew Luck and the Colts. And they go into Cincinnati and they win 29-17. They're playing some pretty good ball. They're only giving up 19 a game. They're scoring 28. The Buccaneers, on the other hand, are getting shredded to the clip of 33 points a game here. The one part that that doesn't bode well is that the Broncos have been getting gashed yardage-wise on the ground, but the Buccaneers don't run the ball all that well, so I don't think that it comes into play. I'm going to pick the Broncos to go into Tampa and win this game, go 4-0.
Hey, Keith, I'm right there with you. What an incredible game Trevor Siemian had last week. I mean, unbelievable. He actually has a top 12 matchup this week. I mean, you could sit there and justify playing him this week over several players. And the only hesitation I have is, okay, it's one game. You need to do it again. And, I'm more comfortable recommending Demaryius Thomas this week. I'm more comfortable recommending Emmanuel Sanders this week because of what we saw. C.J. Anderson, a must start. Broncos defense, a must start. For the Buccaneers, I'm hesitant on Jameis Winston. Charles Sims, I suppose, RB2, certainly a flex play. Mike Evans, I'm very hesitant on. Adam Humphries, he's been pretty hot lately, but I'd avoid him for right now. We need to see another game out of him. I'm not satisfied. Who's the kid? Cameron Brate. He's intriguing. This isn't a bad matchup for him, but if he ends up being like Tyler Eifert, 40 yards and 0 TDs, going to kill you. So I might hold off one more week and let's see how he does. But God, everything about this game reeks Denver Broncos. This just doesn't sit well with me for the Buccaneers, and I think we continue. Oh, you brought up an interesting stat, and it was the Broncos defense. Was it on the ground?
Yes, they give up a lot of rushing yards on the ground.
Let's see. Where are they on my list here? Oh shoot, I can't find. Oh, there we go. Yeah, 249 and 3. Which, so I guess Charles Sims could actually have a pretty decent game here.
Huh.
He could have a decent game.
Could.
But, again, I wouldn't change my evaluation of him as he's an RB2, possibly a low-end RB2. I'm sticking with the Broncos. Their team is still for real.
Yeah. In the offseason, when all the defensive players started jettisoning themselves from the Broncos, I thought for sure they'd take a step back, but they have just simply reloaded. For certain. All right, the LA Rams travel to the Arizona Cardinals in a battle of teams that couldn't wait to get the hell out of St. Louis. The Rams sitting at 2-1, the Cardinals 1-2. The Rams sitting at 2-1 is as much of a shock to you as it is to me. That is, there is no doubting that. But they are only scoring 15.3 points per game. The Cardinals 26. They're both giving up 21 a game. Offensively, the Cardinals are a much better passing team. They both rush about the same. On defense, the Cardinals are much better defensively against the pass, but they give up 33 more yards per game on the ground, but they are both surrendering a century here. Look, the Cardinals game in Buffalo was an aberration last week, and I don't think Bruce Arians and company is going to allow a repeat of that disaster. They're at home. It's a division game for them. And the Rams are not as good as 2-1 as their record would indicate. I know it's only 2-1, but still, they shouldn't be 2-1 in my opinion. I'm picking the Cardinals at home to rebound.
Yeah, they should rebound like they did. What was it, from week 1 to week 2? They should just demolish the Rams. Besides Todd Gurley, it's very difficult to start anyone else, despite the fact that there are some favorable matchups for the Rams. And there was, it's funny, Keith. Last week, somebody asked me if they should play Todd Gurley, and I told them, well, of course they should. And remember my prediction was? Do you remember my prediction?
No, I didn't.
My prediction last week to you was Todd Gurley would score the first touchdown of the Rams for 2016, and he did it. So, you got to keep playing the guy, regardless of what's going on with their offense. For the Cardinals, David Johnson, a must start. Larry Fitzgerald, I think you got to keep starting him. And then Michael Floyd and John. Oh, Michael Floyd. He had a concussion. If he's not active for this game, John Brown suddenly becomes a very intriguing play against the secondary, which I think that they can take advantage of. So you can go ahead and start him as your wide receiver 3 with confidence. Carson Palmer, he's a low-end QB1 in 12-team leagues. Are there a couple guys I might play ahead of him? Yeah. If you own Carson Palmer, try to stay the course. Hopefully you have a winning team, because once he gets to this tough stretch of tough games, his schedule will ease up, and I think the best is yet to come. But I'm taking the Cardinals at home.
All right. The New Orleans Saints travel to the San Diego Chargers. The Saints at 0-3. And no, and 3. And the San Diego Chargers at 1-2. The Saints losing by 1 to the Raiders, losing by 3 to the Giants, and losing by 13 to the Falcons at home. The San Diego Chargers losing in overtime in Week 1, beating the Jacksonville Jaguars, and losing by 4 in Indianapolis last week. The Chargers are extremely beat up, losing Keenan Allen and Danny Woodhead. You look at statistically how these teams match up. The Saints' defense is just as shoddy as it usually is, giving up 32 a game. They're in San Diego. There's still that guy Rivers under quarterback. I'm taking the Chargers to make the Saints' misery continue.
Yeah, it was I think I'm looking at this game and I thought, well, number one, highest to second highest scoring game of the week, which means you're going to play fantasy players in this one. And when it came down to picking a winner, I looked at what the defenses were giving up, and the Saints are giving up 32 points to the Chargers 26. I'm like, oh my God. That's amazing.
And the Chargers are giving up 341 passing yards a game.
That's crazy. Crazy. So the way I view it is Drew Brees is going to jack up this score, and that's going to force Phillip Rivers to unload, which is why this is going to be such a great high-scoring game. Rivers is a top 10 start. Drew Brees, obviously a must start. Start the running backs here. Ingram finally got into the groove. They made him a little bit bigger part of the passing game last week. We're hoping that continues. Melvin Gordon is still the top dog there. Hopefully he gets you 100 and a score. Let's see. Willie Snead is supposed to be back. If he's back, he's a must start, as is Brandon Cooks. If Snead is out for some reason, then obviously move up Michael Thomas. On the other side, Travis Benjamin is a wide receiver 3. Terrell Williams as a flex play on deeper teams. And keep your eye on Antonio Gates. He's still banged up. He's still hurt. So Hunter Henry could get another shot. I still think it's a little too early to play him in fantasy, but it's certainly not too early to watch how he does, and if he does well, to start considering him going forward. And my sleeper in this game is Tavares Cadet. And the reason why he's my sleeper is, and I know you want to know why. I'm
waiting with bated breath.
With bated breath. The San Diego Chargers have given up to running backs 215 receiving yards and 1 TD in the passing game. So I think he's sort of a sleeper here. But again, it depends. This is where the risk is. If Mark Ingram becomes a bigger part of the receiving game. So we'll see.
All right. Who's your pick?
I'm going to take the Chargers at home.
The Dallas Cowboys travel to the San Francisco 49ers. The Cowboys sitting at 2-1. The 49ers at 1-2. Dak Prescott looking poised. If he's not exactly lighting up the fantasy stat sheet by any stretch of the imagination, but he is doing what he needs to do for his team.
Yes.
and the Cowboys are scoring to almost 26 points per game. The Niners 24. They're only giving up 20 compared to 27.7 for the 49ers. The Cowboys are just a much more talented team at this stretch of the campaign, if you will. But the Cowboys have not run the ball. Cowboys' run defense, rather, I'm looking at this backwards, has been downright stalwart. And that means it's going to fall on Blaine Gabbert to lead the way through the air. The Cowboys are giving up just a shade under 300 a game through the air. I hate to go against home teams. It really does bother me, but I'm going to pick the Cowboys on the road just simply because they're the most talented roster.
I'm going to take the Cowboys too because they're doing exactly what it takes to win their football games, and I appreciate that. In a situation where their defense is not necessarily the most talented, and they're starting a rookie quarterback who, while good, he's a rookie quarterback and he's playing like a rookie quarterback. He's just playing like a good rookie quarterback. So, a big factor in this is Dez Bryant, whether he plays or not, and it makes it interesting because I know Adam. Cole Beasley, he's a wide receiver 3, flex play for sure. Ezekiel Elliott, a weekly must start. Certainly Jason Witten is a low NTE one who, after week 1, he hasn't torn up the stat sheet the last 2 weeks, so you have to be a little cautious there, and you might want to go with your other tight end until he is more established in the offense. But Terrence Williams starts becoming an interesting play, and he's an interesting play because he just has to step up. And while, the opportunity's been there before, I find it hard to come up with a situation where a fantasy football team owner will play him, but I could see it happening in 14 or 16 team leagues, especially if you're required to start like multiple flex plays. He's an option if you're short on the position. On the side of the 49ers, Carlos Hyde, and that's it. I recommended benching him. I think it was last week, and he had 2 touchdowns. And I did it strictly on the matchup, and he struggled the week before. But so this week, I wouldn't step away from that. He's going to be the focus of their offense, and just keep playing him away, and keep your fingers crossed and that he keeps producing. But like you, Keith, I'm taking the Cowboys in this, and this might actually end up being a low-scoring game. That's why the limited plays.
Breaking news, according to Pro Football Talk, they just tweeted that the Cowboys have fined Dez Bryant for missing an MRI and team meetings. So whatever that means for him and his status going forward, keep an eye on that, obviously. The Kansas City Chiefs, the Sunday night game, travel to the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Chiefs sitting at 2-1 after beating the Jets to a pulp 24-3 last week. The Steelers went into Pennsylvania and got pantsed 34-3 last week. Who saw the Carson Wentz train coming? I think maybe only Benjamin Albright, but that nobody was talking about him before the season. And just
Carson Wentz.
Yeah, I think
I was
during the draft or in the preseason.
Yes, I was the one saying he should have been taken number 1.
All right, then I'll give you credit. Props to you. Hold on. Let me
Benjamin Albright.
No, but I think it's the two of you, honestly. But if you did, here you go. This is for you right here, okay? Because I know you need it. All right, so
thanks.
Anyway, back on task. We're not even talking about the Eagles. The Chiefs' defense is no joke, giving up 16 points per game. Only giving up. Well, they're giving up over $1 on the ground, but they're only giving up 233 in the air. The Steelers' defense just similarly stingy, only 75 yards given up on the ground, but they are getting torched through the air to the tune of 332 yards. Offensively, the Steelers running for 100, the Chiefs running for 91. Something's got to give here in this matchup, right, kids? Because their passing offenses are similar too. The Chiefs score 23 a game. The Steelers score 21.7 a game. This is going to be a really fantastic Sunday night matchup. I really hate when primetime football matchups don't deliver, and I really think that this is going to be a really great game to just sit and watch and enjoy. As far as who wins, The Chiefs' defense can't be overlooked here, but in Pittsburgh, Le'Veon Bell is supposed to make his return as long as nothing goes haywire. I'm going to pick the Steelers because I'm just going to go with the home team, but it's not going to be by a lot.
Yeah, this should be an ugly game. I'm taking the Steelers for only one reason: the return of Le'Veon Bell. I really think that he will fire up not only the home crowd, the team. Their offense will become even more dynamic than we saw in weeks 1 and week 2. But this is a good Chiefs team. I wouldn't put it past them to somehow eke out a win. But this should be sort of a high-scoring game. You're going to start Spencer Ware for the Chiefs. Macklin is more of a wide receiver 3 flex play this week. Travis Kelce, sort of a mid-range to lower-end tight end play this week. Chiefs defense, you have to be a little bit cautious. I think what we saw they've been getting better the last 3 weeks. You can play them, but they're a low-end option. For the Steelers, start Ben, start AB, start Le'Veon Bell, and everybody else take them off the table just because I think there's too many mouths to feed, and everything should be the focus should be these top playmakers. And whatever team wins this game, I predict will absolutely positively wins this game will absolutely positively make the playoffs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Monday night, final game. The New York Giants travel to the Minnesota Vikings. The Giants at 2-1, not playing bad football. The Vikings, though, 3-0. Who would have thought? If you would have told me that Teddy Bridgewater and Adrian Peterson would be lost for the year in the first 3 games, they'd make a trade for Sam Bradford and still be 3-0, I would have smacked you across your face with a rubber fish. But don't ask me where I would have got the rubber fish from, but I would have had one. Anyway, the Vikings defense is the matchup to watch here because they took that well-oiled Carolina Panthers offense and just literally dismantled it, like threw a grenade into the gears and just watched it all blow up. And they're at home in prime time. This is going to be a coming out party for this Vikings team on national TV. The Giants, you look at their games. They lost a division game at home to the Redskins, a game they could have and probably should have won. They beat the Saints by 16-13. The Saints' defense is awful. They can only put up 16 points against them. They squeaked out a Week 1 win against Dallas 20-19 in Dak Prescott's first game. They're 2-1. They're playing decent ball, but they're not convincing me enough. And I think that Vikings defense is just too real. And at home, in the prime time, in the spotlight for that new stadium, I'm picking the Vikings.
Keith, I am too. That defense is for real. I'm going to start them. I got lucky. I picked them up in one league. I couldn't believe it. Somebody, for some reason, I think, was scared about this matchup and whatever their matchup is next week, and then they go on the bye. I thought to myself, that's absolutely ridiculous. These guys, every game that we thought they were going to struggle, they didn't. They're good football players. They show up to play football. The Giants, they've struggled against teams like this. And it's a scary matchup for their playmakers. Everybody from Eli Manning to Orleans Darkwa to Odell Beckham Jr., Sterling Shepard, Victor Cruz. They're all shaky matchups. And, I can't recommend necessarily benching Eli Manning. Certainly I wouldn't. Odell Beckham, I keep playing him. But you have to sort of look at them and say, okay, is there somebody else I could put in ahead of them that would be a better play? And if you can't, by all means, go ahead, with the exception of Odell Beckham. And for the Vikings, the only player I like there is Stephon Diggs. He has just been good week in, week out. I do not like this matchup for the Vikings running backs. Believe it or not, the Giants allowed the second least fantasy points to the position. And I went back and looked at their opponents, and I thought, well, there's no real reason why none of these teams couldn't run on them except they're playing good ball. Where teams are attacking the Giants is in the passing game. So, there's always hope for Sam Bradford, but I just don't think he's fantasy relevant just yet, and I would avoid him. But close it out. I think it's the Vikings, and they're making that march towards repeat NFC North champs.
All right, real quick before we go.
Oh, yes.
Well, we got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So I guess I can take my time here. So my fantasy team, my quarterbacks are Carson Palmer and Dak Prescott. Okay. Joe Flacco is on my waiver wire. He's available. Do I drop Prescott for Flacco and start Flacco instead of Palmer through the stretch?
Hang on 1 second. I need to pull up my rankings, make sure my inclination is to say no. Okay. You keep playing Carson Palmer even in that matchup against the Rams. And let me just double check that. Oh no, I take that back. Go ahead with Joe Flacco. I have him at the next spot ahead of Carson Palmer.
The guy dropped Dak Prescott?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Okay.
Done?
Done, sir.
Let's move on.
Done and done. All right, let's check the Twitter for any Ask TFG hashtags here. And we are blank. We've been getting a lot of those on demand. And so, folks, if you're listening to this on demand, hit up the Twitter, hashtag AskTFG. Jim gets back to you lickety split. He's just sitting there by his laptop every day just waiting for your tweets. Use the wealth, the on-demand wealth, almost like having your own personal guru at your disposal. And head over to thefantasygreek.com and check out all the latest rankings and everything. You're getting close to the middle point of the season. Bye weeks are coming into play now already. The Eagles and the Packers are on byes. This is the time to not wing it. Consult everybody possible. And Jim's your man. Available on demand through Twitter with the hashtag AskTFG. And also, hey, we're here every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time at LateNightSportsRadio.com. And you can catch this show on demand either at LateNightSportsRadio.com, through Spreaker, on iTunes, Stitcher. We're everywhere. So for Jim Sarantias from thefantasygreek.com, I'm Keith Grieve from 87 Sports Fans. Head up over to the Facebook page at facebook.com/87sportsfans. Head over to thefantasygreek.com for all of your fantasy football rankings and news updates. Good luck, everybody, and may the odds be forever in your favor.